Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Science Q&A, and it's the Helen Czerski special. The reason that we're doing this, one of the many reasons, is because we always end up with a huge number of questions for Helen. And sometimes, especially like, for instance, last week when we were doing the COVID one, it was quite hard to kind of go off from that subject. So we've now collated we hope anyway. I'm sure there might be other people who go, hang on a minute, my question wasn't there and I asked it back on June the 12th, 2020. Also, another thing that we're doing is we've done 70 of these live shows because things continue to change, and I think two things. One is obviously people's online watching habits are changing and returning to perhaps the way it was pre-pandemic. They do remember the pandemic's not over, and please do keep wearing masks, by the way. Thank you very much everyone out there who is still wearing masks on public transport and in shops, etc. It is for a lot of people that I know, some of whom have health conditions, some of whom are pregnant, and some of whom, like me, are people who are self-employed and have been waiting a very, very long time to go back to work. And now that we are back to work, we would like to stay in work, please. So thank you for all those people who and I do realize it's a lot of people aren't wearing masks, not because it's some kind of grand gesture, but just because they kind of think, oh, it seems to be reasonably over and everything's, but yeah, check the figures and all of those kind of things. And I think any of you out there with children will probably know that it's not good in schools at the moment. So anyway, that was another little detour. So yeah, we've done 70 of these shows, and things are changing now. So we're still going to do some Sunday Science Q&As live. I think at least once a month, but we're not going to do them every single Sunday, but we are going to try and make sure that every single Sunday there is new science content. I'm doing a bunch of interviews with scientists who have books out or new research, and so some weekends at 10 a.m. we'll be putting out a couple of interviews with scientists about what they're up to, and Helen may well go off and we'll film some experiments, some things that you've said. Again, if there's anything in particular you'd like us to investigate, send in those ideas, because what we're going to do is make some short films where we will look at some of the questions about the universe and the world around us, which is part of the universe, a subset of the universe, and we'll make some short films about that kind of thing. So there's still going to be pretty much every Sunday some science stuff, but Sunday Science Q&A live is kind of not going to be quite so much. Now, this week's book Shambles, I have to mention, I always have to mention it, obviously, because this is the plug part of the show, but Catherine Mannix is fantastic, and some of you might have read her book about dealing with death, which is very beautifully written, and her latest book, Listen, is about how we need to learn different techniques of how we listen to people who are experiencing trauma or loss or whatever it might be. And I interviewed her for book Shambles, and it was a really she's got such compassion and humanity. So if you get a chance, and especially at this time, of course, where sometimes the amount of trauma people are dealing with can be at peak times here, I think Catherine is a voice really worth listening to. And then next week will be book Shambles is this book, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. It's Francesca Stavrakopoulou, and it is her book God and Anatomy, which is all about the physical existence of God in the Bible, where, amongst other things, he's doing things like battling an aqueous sea dragon and all manner of lurid and strange things, and but from the Bible, things that are very often passed over to turn him into a kind of ethereal being. But that is a fantastic book. So we're talking about Francesca Stavrakopoulou for next week's book Shambles. And finally, you can pre-order signed copies of The Importance of Being Interested, my new book, which comes out on the 7th of October. And I can also do dedicated versions. If you go to the cosmicshambles.com, if you go to that site and you go to our shop, you will find that there are ways of ordering that. So probably in the next week, I will be able to do any dedicated copies of the book. And from the 7th of October as well, I'm travelling across the UK. Very likely I'll be coming to a town near you, because I'm doing, I think, 111 events in 2 months, and which start on Tuesday. I'll be in Wigtown, and then next weekend I'm doing 4 different events in Larne in Wales, which is a beautiful festival as well. And then I go on and on and on. Anyway, there you are. Good morning, Helen.
Hello. You are this morning. I feel like I've got into this habit of commenting, making not quite personal comments about you, but this morning it's your elbows, because you're leaning into the camera. Your elbows are very dominant
Yeah, it's because I've got if you see there's books there and there's books there, and I've now it's like that bit of
yourself anymore.
The comedian who leans on the I'll tell you another one, ladies and gentlemen. It's that kind of look. Yeah, my dominant. Well, I think I've still got reasonably smooth elbows for a man of my age, Helen. So obviously, I find whatever is left of me that is not in total decrepitude and point it towards the camera.
Make it your best elbow side.
Yeah. Well, these are the soft elbows of someone who's not worked hard enough in the fields.
I'm very well. I've been away out and about. I guess hopefully lots of people have had a little bit of out and about before the winter and the weather arrives. So I did go out and about, and Loch Ness last week. I know I mentioned this then, but it was an enormous privilege to paddle down the loch when the weather was good. I was there 3 days later, and the weather was terrible, and we could have had to paddle for 3.5 hours down that loch in the driving rain, and I am intensely glad that the weather didn't do that to us. So I'm back and bouncing basically. And this
I just ask you, because you mentioned that you're doing Monster the Loch weekend, you do so many of these kind of outside endurance-y things. Are there any that you've just gone, that's enough of this? Let's just get off our bicycles or out of our canoes or whatever it might be. We're not going on anymore.
I usually make a decision before it gets to that. Once you're there, I reckon you've probably got to do it. But there are definitely things that I've hesitated. Like, I've never run a marathon. I've done half marathons. I haven't got the patience. The thing that stops me training for a marathon is that I'm not sure. You're usually these days you can't have earphones for safety, because you obviously need to be able to hear what's going on around you. So you just have to think about nothing very much for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, whatever it is. And that I would just be bored at the end of a half marathon. Like, I'm physically a bit tired, but I'm like bored now. So funnily enough, in the canoes, I don't notice that. So I've never given up halfway through, but I definitely I don't go out in all weathers. I'm a bit of a wuss in the rain. But it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about looking back on the bits of the past year that we can remember. Last winter, I was out running in the dark every morning, and I just did it because I had to. So it's interesting that you do well. If I wanted exercise, I had to. So there's a lot in this about our views towards discomfort, which is a learned thing. If you have the right gear and if you're used to doing it, you just do it. And that was what I did last winter. And I think, I hope we all spend a lot more time outdoors. I would love, I know some neighbours don't like their local cafes having tables outside because it's noisier and all of that kind of stuff. But I would love the British to get more used to the outdoors instead of hiding away from it. Like, put on an extra coat and be outside. I think that would be good for all of us. And it because we're so good at separating ourselves from nature. And I think we need to get, just be outside, and don't be afraid of the outside. I think that's a good thing. So I'm still a bit of a wuss sometimes, definitely, but I do try, because I think, I'm waterproof. It is the nature of human skin that it is generally waterproof. So, as long as I'm not cold, really, really cold, I'll give it a go. So, yes.
And what have you got for us this week? Have you got a week in science?
Well, so I've got a show and tell, but it's a show and tell that came from questions, because there are 3 pictures behind me that have been on the wall ever since January this year, and I don't think I've ever told everyone what they are. So that is going to be my show and tell this week. I'm going to tell you about these pictures. Now, shall I bring them, or can you see them well enough?
I think bring them, if it's possible. I think that would be great.
So this one, now where do I have to put this? Let's see.
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
Before I get going on these, so they're all from the Natural History Museum. The next 2 are from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year Award, but this one's just a picture from their gallery. So everyone can buy these at the Natural History Museum. So this one's a turtle, but what's interesting about, I'm just going to turn my microphone around a bit. What's interesting about the turtle is it's got these fish on it. It's a green sea turtle, but what they're doing is they're feeding off it, they're cleaning it, grooming it. So there's algae and bacteria and bits and pieces that are just growing on the turtle's shell because it's a good place to live. And so you do get fish that just come along and graze on it. So that's what's going on here. I'm not quite sure. I think they're a type of butterfly fish, but I'm not sure. Some fish expert might tell me. And you can see in the bottom corner here, this reef. So when you're diving under the water, the red light gets absorbed by the water very quickly. So everything looks kind of greeny blue. If you shine a torch on it, it often comes up really bright colours. But this is the kind of background, that kind of colour of a reef is what you see underwater. And the deeper it goes, the bluer it gets. So that's the turtle. I'm not going to be able to put it back now.
The nice thing is, because you're doing this with an audience, they'll all be able to instruct you on how to make sure the pictures are all straight at the end. Hang on, that's like just a little bit more to the left, a little bit more to the left.
That one's gone somewhere slightly weird. Now this one, this is my favourite. This is the one I got first before I decided that I needed some friends. So it's a big fin reef squid. And the thing, there are two things that are amazing about this picture. One of them is that it's just a beautiful squid. It was probably about 20 centimetres long. It's obviously taken in the dark. It's not actually bioluminescing. It's just got a torch shining on it. And this is a mating display. So it's got these amazing colours that would have been running up and down its body. And so it's a beautiful picture. The other thing about this picture, which is amazing, is that it was taken by someone who was under 14. It won the Young Photographer of the Year award in 2016, I think. And this child, who must be an adult now, had only been, I think, diving. They passed their diving qualification at 10. They were lucky enough to be taken somewhere where you get to see this kind of thing. And yes, they won the 11 to 14-year-old category that year. But I love this picture. I just love the colours on it. I love squids and cephalopods and all those kinds of things. As you all know, I'm a big fan of that category. That's that one. Shall I just?
Yeah, no, keep it like that. Keep it like that. I like. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Now this one is, and it needs something to go with it. So this one is the one that confuses everyone. This is the one that the Shambles audience have asked about. And what it is, it's called Spiral. I think it was in the photography thing also in 2019, not sure. Now this, if you were to guess what this is, it would take a long time, I think, because what this is a worm. It's a type of worm, a bristle worm or a polychaete, it's a class of worms that are all over the ocean. They're amazing. But they're very odd to our eyes. They've got a head and a tail, and then they've got segments in between, and the segments have bristles and sticky out bits. And so the worm is underneath. It's very small. It's probably about 2.5 centimetres across. The worm is all underneath somewhere, burrowed into the coral. And this bit that's sticking out is effectively both its lungs and its mouth. So all these frondy bits in this kind of spiral thing are both filtering ocean water for food, and they're also allowing it to exchange oxygen across its surface. And so it's a beautiful picture. And I was actually somebody very kindly made me, this is a Christmas tree worm, which is it's also a polychaete, but it's got this worm bit underneath, and then it's got these little bits that stick up, and that's what we're looking at. It's one of those that we're looking at in the picture.
So what's the scale of that then? What's actually the size of it?
So I don't know. I think it's about 2 centimetres across. I think if you were to measure from one side of the picture to another, that's 2 centimetres across. And anyone listening to the podcast, just look up Christmas tree worms and polychaetes, and then you will find one of those. But the amazing thing, I'm going to put this back and I'll tell you something else about polychaetes. This is the worst art exhibition in the world. Look at that now.
I'm afraid that we cannot return your pictures, in the words of Tony Hart.
So there are lots of polychaetes throughout the ocean, which is this type of segmented worm. And they are like, evolution just does whatever works, right? So one of the things that one species of this worm does is, the worm itself lives at the bottom and it needs to get up to the top to mate. So what it does is its tail grows its own eye, takes the sperm or the eggs, breaks off, swims up to the surface, and when it gets to the surface, it bursts and it releases the sperm and the eggs. And they all do that on the same day of the lunar month. And the worm down below just grows another tail. And next time it's time to mate, that tail grows itself a little proto-eye, swims up to the surface and bursts. And it can produce several of these in its lifetime. So there is a type of polychaete that reproduces like that, which is just, it basically sends off like a little almost a little spaceship, a little emissary into the mating world that's not going to come back. It's a suicide mission that will generate the next generation. It's amazing. A bit mad.
I find those, it's like in Nicola Rahaney's Bushel Instinct, where, you know, the number of living creatures that have you know, suicide is required for the survival of the whole. So, you know, these kind of, you know, ants, for instance, that will basically, you know, that when all the ants at night go into there and they fill in the hole from the outside, and then they know they have to trudge off, where they will then die. Because if they die too, even if they die too near the nest, then that means there'll be a hit what's in there, and so they then take a walk, and then they die in some distance, which is just, you know, and the number of animals that have that kind of existence, which is very, in one way, it is, I think, for a human being, it's a very bleak thing to be reminded that life exists to create more life. To create more life, to create more life. And what is the purpose? Will they be creating some art? No, they'll just be creating some more life and life and life.
It's like that thing about a chicken just being an egg's way of making another egg.
Yeah.
It's such a, it's like, it's just your, as long as the genetics carries on, it's all right. That, you know, that's what you're after. So, but we're very narrow-minded in our view of, you know, I think it's really interesting when, I mean, and I just did it then, that we describe these things as weird or amazing or bonkers, and you're like, no. What that's saying is we've got a very narrow view, and the rest of the world is just getting on with it, and we think our thing is normal because we've got these blinkers on. And actually, you know, why not? If that's what works for evolution, you know, it's not weird. It works, so that's okay. That's kind of the test.
But one, try and ignore a lot of what nature tells you to do, and, you know, rise above it or rise to the side of it, or whatever way you want to look at it, and do something else. That's what Darwin said, didn't he? Which is, you know, this is one of the battles of being human, is that it's not to say, well, nature tells us, and we always see this on Twitter and all those places where people will go, but nature says this or science says this, and you go, well, we're an odd creature, we're a strange creature, and sometimes we have to say, well, nature does say this, but I'm going to go and do that instead.
Well, it's like we get to choose. I mean, I talk a lot about the Earth as an engine. There's, you know, we get energy from the sun, and you know, we borrow it for a bit. Atoms go round and round, but we are different because we get to choose how we are part of that engine. You know, the polychaete worm just has to, it doesn't have a choice. It just does what it does. Whereas we can choose what part of cog in the machine we are, and that is what makes us different a little bit.
Well, I'm glad to say that anyway. Evan's question, and Evan was desperate to know what the middle picture was, because obviously that's always where your head has been. Evan, I hope you have now got all the answers you needed for those pictures. Now we're going to go through, we've got loads of questions, we'll see how many we can get through. And just a quick reminder, of course, if any of you who don't already, I know a lot of you support us via Patreon. If you are able to support us via Patreon, go to patreon.com/Cosmic Shambles. This is not obviously the only thing we make. We make lots of other shows as well, and our Tips for Existence series continues to go out as well. We've just about the end of another of the third series of that, so thank you very much for getting help with that. And also coming up next Monday at 7:30 p.m. British summertime, I'm in conversation with Tim Minchin. So if you get a chance, 7:30 next Monday, I'll be talking to Tim Minchin. Now here we go then. Question number one, or question number two, because
this is like an exam. We've done the preliminaries. Now it's time
get
to the
through these. I think you're going to be fine on these. Alison, age 6, would like to know, why can you sometimes see the moon in the daytime? And I think that's very interesting. It's one of those things that you just pass over because, oh, well, there it is again. But it's fascinating, and sometimes the most fascinating time to look at it as well.
Yeah, so you can see, so the moon is just going round and round the Earth, and the sun illuminates, from our point of view, sometimes if it's the sun and then the Earth and then the moon is behind, but not exactly behind, then all of the moon is illuminated, and then you can only see it at night because it's round the back of the Earth, so you definitely can't see it during the day. But if it's the sun and then the moon and then the Earth, because the moon has come around the other side, the moon actually isn't lit to us at all. So you'd only get maybe a little sliver down the side of light. So in either of those two cases, you can't see it during the day. But if it's off to either side, then half of it will be illuminated. And its light comes from so there's kind of a right angle. So there's the sun and there's a line that comes to the Earth, and then you sort of go off sideways and the moon is somewhere over there. And so it's half lit by the sun. And if the sky is hasn't got very much light coming from it. So remember, the sky is blue because there's scattering of light in the atmosphere. So it's a bit like seeing the atmosphere. So if there aren't any clouds in the way, and if there isn't so much light coming from the rest of the atmosphere, then you're getting extra light from the moon. And because it's brighter than what's around it, then you can see it. If it was dimmer than the sky around it, then you wouldn't be able to see it. So you can see it when it's brighter than the sky around it because it stands out.
Brilliant, thank you. Joe Sem says, I've just watched how sound can be used to map the ocean. I was wondering if it would be possible to take a still sound photo and turn it into a visual photo, and how accurate it would be at any given moment. Would a snapshot show us fish species, current plant life, and create a sort of diorama?
Yeah, so this actually does happen a lot, and this is what sonar does. It sends sound. It sends sound into the ocean, and there's different ways that sonars can work. So a sonar device is kind of like a torch and a camera for sound instead of light. So it sends out some sound, which is like a torch shining light, and then it measures what comes back. And you can have sonar that just does that for a single point. So you can measure the depth of the ocean by measuring how long the sound takes to go down and come back. But actually, what you can also do is sweep that beam, like sweeping a searchlight in front of you, and then you can build up a picture. And so ships have this quite commonly. And what's interesting is that it's not just that sound bounces back, it's how long it takes, because the length of time it takes tells you how far away it is. So you can absolutely build up pictures using sonar. And actually, this is done all the time. So even fishing, so it's how oceanographers now measure the depth of the ocean. As we're in a ship passing over the ocean, there's a thing called a multi-beam sonar attached to the hull of the ship that is it's giving you a little picture of the ribbon of seafloor that you're passing over all the time. But also fish finders, so fishing vessels. One of the things that did actually contribute to overfishing is that fishing vessels can send out sound, and fish, some species of fish, the bony fish, have a little air bubble inside them called a swim bladder that helps adjust their buoyancy, and that thing is really visible to sound. It shines out like it's really visible in the sound world. So basically, if you want to find fish, sardines, for example, something like that, big shoal of them, you go out in your fishing boat. You've got this fish finder which you can buy on Amazon. They're very common. And as you go over a big shoal of fish, you're looking at an image, and you will see not every individual fish necessarily, but you'll see a big thing in the water column, and you'll know that that's where the fish are. So it's actually been helping fishermen find shoals of fish for a long time now, so the 50 or 60 years, I think. So yes, we do this all the time, and it's a little bit harder to make very precise images because the way sound travels in the ocean, the very, very high notes don't travel very far. And so, but the very, very deep notes, you can only see things in quite a blurry way. You can't see really sharp edges. So there is a bit of a trade-off, but absolutely. And just finally, I did visit a few years ago. There is an archaeological site off Dunwich, I think, off the Norfolk coast. Someone's going to tell me it's Essex and not Norfolk or something like that.
No, Suffolk. If it's anything, it's Suffolk. Yeah.
I'm not sure. One of those, somewhere out there, somewhere out to the east. But there's an archaeological site underwater. But the North Sea is really full of particles. So you can't see anything. If you shine a torch, you can't see your hand if you put it right in front of the torch. So we were out there with divers who had a very unusual setup. They had really big, heavy iron boots, so they could actually stand on the seafloor. But then instead of having a mask, they had on their chest, they had a sonar. So they were kind of a bit like a dolphin. And that sonar on their chest sent out sound, and it bounced back, and then into their goggles they could see an image, a blurry image, but they could see an image of what was ahead, and they were looking for this archaeological site, this submerged church, a bit like a dolphin would echo sound. So it does exist. It's never quite as good as light, but it does work.
Leroy, who's 10, hello Leroy, would like to know, could you make a plane with wings that flap like a bird? Now, of course, they used to show this footage all the time when I was growing up, those early footage of people trying to fly 100 meters or whatever, and you would have these kind of flapping machines that would go. So is that possible?
It's an idea. So I think Leonardo da Vinci. So he said this is a great idea because it was thought up by a great mind. Leonardo da Vinci, I think, had made a model of, or some thought about trying to make flapping wings that would propel something. Because if you don't know much about flight, it looks mostly like the flying is done by the flapping. Whereas the gliding is actually more important in being able to fly. But anyway, so people have tried this, and the thing is, it's just not very efficient. So birds obviously do it, and they do it very well. But birds are kind of flexible. And so it's a bit easier to adjust, where if you want to make something that's got structural strength enough to carry a load of people, and it's probably got to be made of metal, you need something a bit more rigid, and it's hard to make that deform in the same way. And basically it's much more efficient just to have an aerofoil, which is a fixed wing, a fixed wing in the sense that it's just a big metal shape. And the way you get lift is you force it forward, and the shape of the aerofoil gives you lift. So actually, if you've got a really heavy thing, and especially something made of metal, and especially something where you can't, flexibly control every aspect of it, efficient to use a plane. But it would be possible to do it, just really inefficient, and you have to be really light to fly like that. So most things that are big glide, like an albatross, for example, it gets itself up, and it's not particularly pretty flyer, but then it's really good at gliding, and it's the gliding that takes it a long way.
I love where I live. There's been a big, red kite breeding program, which of course have been hugely successful. But one of those ones that's so successful, you imagine they're now going to start a culling program before long. But it's fantastic, and it is a beautiful thing to watch the way that they can just hover, and thinking about the mechanism of that. Should we go straight into quantum computing? Are you ready to answer a quantum? Let's go with this. Raoul would like to know, I've seen a lot of headlines lately about quantum computing. Can someone give a quick 101 on what this is? And that someone is you, Helen.
The problem with this is that there is one very simple answer, which doesn't make much sense, generally speaking, to most people. And then beyond that, we don't know how to do it yet. So here's the quick answer. The quick answer is that all computing up to this point has been done in, you have a 0 or you have a 1, and you have a bit that switches from 0 to 1, and it can only be in one of those two states. But in the quantum world, you've got things like superposition and entanglement, this weird world of quantum where if you put two atoms or two particles near each other, until you look at them, they can be in a mixture of states. They can maybe, what happens to one of them depends on what happens to the other. And actually, Carlo Rovelli's recent book, I think it's the one before. Is it Helgoland or is it the one before that? Maybe it is Helgoland.
Helgoland is the one that's got quite a lot of quantum stuff in it. Yeah, it
is Helgoland. So he talks a lot about the meaning of entanglement and things like that. But anyway, the point is that you've got this mixed state. So those atoms, until you look at them in the right way, they're not either 0 or 1. There's some probability of them being something in between, and that potentially lets you compute things in a different way. Now, there's some things that are quite important about quantum computing. One of them is that it can't compute anything that can't be computed by a normal computer, but it could potentially, for some types of problem, do it much, much, much more quickly, sometimes less than the age of the universe, which is quite important. So it's not that they can do everything better. It's that they might, if we can make them work, do some things much more quickly. And the thing is that there's various schemes for making this work. They all depend on this really sensitive system and keeping track of these atoms, which are, you've got to watch them in the right way. You've got to hold on to them in the states that they're in. It's really difficult to do it for more than one bit at a time. I think Google did claim that they had done something in 2019, but that no public data has been made available to show whether it worked or it didn't. So basically, it's a theoretical concept which could work, but the practicalities are really, really hard, and those haven't been worked out yet, and I suppose may never be worked out. But people do think it would work if we could control it, if we could make it work, So it's not a very good answer, I'm afraid. But if you look at quantum computing, I mean, it is a bit like that. There's this principle, which is that you don't have to have either 0 or 1. But after that, everything is still up for grabs.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nicole would like to know, Nicole, who's aged 8, hello. Why can't we use seawater to water our gardens?
Oh, it's a really counterintuitive answer, because it would dry them out. It's the same reason that seafarers can die at sea from dehydration, even though they are surrounded by they could be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You can still die from dehydration. And salt plays a very important role in the cells of all living things and how they work. So inside the inside of a cell is a little bit salty. It's about 9 on the salinity scale, when the ocean is 35, something like that. So it's perhaps about a quarter as salty as the ocean. But the salt in the cell does this really important thing, is that a cell doesn't just have buckets. It can't just move water in and out. So in order to control the water, whether the water is crossing from the inside to the outside of the cell, what it does is it controls ions, and those are salt. So basically, for the purposes of this, that's like salt. And so what happens is that to get salt across the boundary of the cell has to move it. It has to definitely put it there. But if it moves lots of salt to one side, say inside the cell, then there's this process called osmosis, which will bring extra water in until the saltiness of the inside equals the saltiness of the outside. So basically, if you put a cell in a load of really salty water, all the ions, all the salts on the outside, so the water goes out. The water goes out to try and make the outside as dilute as the inside. And of course, that's a losing battle. So the cell shrivels up and dies. So actually, if you drink salty water, you become dehydrated. And there are some species that there's 2 classes of fish that do something really interesting here, which is that, I can never remember what they're called. It's like anadromous and catadromous. Someone's going to correct me. But salmon and eels are 2 examples of this. So eels are born in the ocean. So they are born surrounded by salt water. So all the pumps on their cells are continually pumping salt out to get rid of it because they've got too much. But then when they swim up a freshwater river, then the water around them hasn't got enough salt. So the pumps all have to all the cells in their bodies switch around, so the pumps are going the other way to pump salt in the opposite direction in order to go from freshwater to saltwater and back again, which is why eels and salmon are amazing. They don't just happen to swim from the seawater to the freshwater. They have to change their entire biochemistry to deal with the fact that they're going from no salt to lots of salt, or the other way around. So to get back to the question, if you water your plants with salt, you'll just shrivel them up, which is why we use salt as a preservative to make pickles and bacon. I don't eat meat, but I gather bacon is preserved with salt. It's because it kills the cells. So yes.
Thank you. I hope that has answered your question. And Atheist Wanderer says here, catching up on old episodes, and Mark Miodovnik said that peanut butter is a liquid. So they would like to know, how is liquid defined? Is jam a liquid?
This has been a point of much contention, including a serious paper that won the Ig Nobel Prize, considering whether a cat was a liquid, because one of the definitions of liquid is that it fills up from the bottom, the shape of the container you put it in. And people have these pictures of cats that have gone into an empty goldfish bowl, and they're just, I'm sure people have seen cats do this. They just kind of pour themselves into the space. And there was a genuine philosophical debate about whether a cat is a liquid, because it seemed to satisfy all the criteria. So when it comes to peanut butter crosses there's a series of things that cross from one to the other. So if you put peanut butter in the fridge, it becomes quite solid, and if you do that, you could hold it upside down for a long time and it won't come out. If you've got slightly softer peanut butter, it will eventually pour out. So I think that's what Mark was referring to, that if you can pour it even on quite a slow time scale, it probably counts as a liquid. But there's a lot of things that you have to look at for a long time before they pour. And actually, Mark has one on his shelf in his office, which has probably dripped a bit further since we last saw him. But he's got bitumen, which is dripping. He put it there like maybe 6 years ago, and it's been slowly sliding over his bookshelf. So technically, it's a liquid. It's just doing it very, very slowly. But there isn't really a clear definition, like that boundary. Because sometimes you haven't got, 100 million years to watch something to check it hasn't moved. It's quite an inconvenient experiment to do. So there's definitely a bit of a blurred line, and it is a deeply philosophical question. So yes, it's good for contemplating, but I would get on with eating your peanut butter without worrying too much. I think that would be quite an important thing.
But it's nice to pause over your peanut butter, isn't it? And just have a little thought experiment for a while before it burns off some calories. Now we've got a question from Rose, and this is back to something we've talked about quite a lot this year, which is about fossil fuel sponsorship. And as some people will have seen recently, that New Scientist decided to drop BP, I think, as a sponsor and a speaker as well, which is an interest. I mean, this whole thing is quite an interesting area. We've been talking about the fact that the Science Museum in London had 3 fossil fuel sponsors, and it's interesting because the New Scientist thing is interesting as well, because when Helen and I did an event with them probably 4 or 5 years ago, we did mention on stage, both of us, that we were slightly uncomfortable with the fact that a weapons manufacturer or defence company, depending on the way you use semantics to cover up your trail, was sponsoring it, and that apparently they were extremely unhappy that we'd said that on stage, which I think is not a good thing, because I think, okay, you take that sponsorship, but don't then expect that you've also bought everyone's silence on this, and that we should have a right to say something when we're on that stage.
Especially for a science event where the whole point is having a debate. The whole point of science is presenting evidence and coming to conclusions. Sorry to interrupt, but
it's fine.
That is absolutely the point. Yeah. They haven't asked either of us back, have they?
No, I don't. I don't think I'll be getting much coverage for the new book, or certainly any positive coverage from them. This is always an interesting, because this is what Rose is actually, she's talking about, that quandary, which is understanding that fossil fuel investment, especially in things like science museums, is problematic. But then the question is that these places need constant investments to attract visitors, to pay bills, etc. And sadly, companies with the money to fund this are the ones who need or want to be part of greenwashing. Where do we get the constant flow of funding from without them? The smaller green companies don't have millions to throw at sponsorship, and so Rose just wondered, in terms of what do we do now? We've seen in the arts sector that many of them have moved on and found different sponsors, but of course, as Rose makes clear, these are companies with an enormous amount of money.
It is really, and one of the things that makes it really difficult is the scale of the money they have is just usually far more than everybody else, which does tell you something, actually. But anyway, and it is a real problem. I have the privilege of being a trustee of Royal Museums Greenwich, so I see museum finances from the inside, and it is the case that the government funding of our national museums is not as high as most people think. I think that is a fair thing to say, and museums are responsible for finding a lot of their own funding, and it is, especially at the moment, it's very, very hard. But I think the approach, so one thing is to say, with my trustee hat on, one of my formal responsibilities as a trustee is not just to make sure that the national collections are looked after and that the buildings don't fall down and all of that. It is to protect the reputation of the museum. And I think that trustees, and I think that's written into all the national museums, and I think that in this case, firstly, there is reputational damage to be concerned about here. So that is a genuine thing, that is not just about the money. When it comes to the money itself, I think you wouldn't say it's okay to murder someone if a load of other people can go to a school with nicer wallpaper or something like that. And so we do make these decisions all the time in life, that there are some things we will not do because it's not appropriate. And I think it's made more complicated in the case of the Science Museum, because it wasn't just that Shell gave them some money for an exhibition. They didn't just give the Science Museum some cash and say, we've just put a load in your piggy bank, off you go. They gave them money for an exhibition on climate change. And this is a company that has a history. It actually specifically says in its shareholder report, they are not going to do anything about climate change. And there was the finding in the Netherlands, that the court that found against them, and they have specifically said, we are not going to change anything we do. We'll follow everybody else, but we're not going to lead. And because they have all the money and the power, they have more of a responsibility to actually take action on these things. Shell's budget, I'll stop ranting about this in a second. Shell's budget is, I think, $180 billion a year. And last year they offered to spend $1 billion on renewables and $80 billion on fossil fuel, development of oil fields and stuff like that. So they are not taking this seriously. So anyway, the answer of what, so I think the problem is that museums inevitably have some kind of moral responsibility, right? That and I think that money is just not available. Like, yes, there are other places to get money. It is really, really hard, but there are wealthy donors. There are other companies. You can work with other organizations. There are ways to do it, but you just have to say that money's off limits. You know, if the mafia turned up and offered you 20 million quid to launder some money, you wouldn't say yes. So I think that there are other ways to find this money, and it is really, really hard. But that's also part of a national responsibility to protect our heritage. So that's when it comes back to how much is the country via the government and taxation supporting museums. And so it's not an easy question, but there are definitely other places to find that money. So yeah, but money talks. And there's also this recent thing about the Sackler dynasty as well. You know, people might have read, there's a book, Empire of Pain, just been written about the Sackler family, who have had a lot of art galleries named after them. And actually those galleries are now being unnamed. I highly recommend the book, but it is really difficult. But the thing is, when there's a lot of money suddenly on offer, you have to ask a lot of questions about where it came from. Because if they're offering a lot more money than anyone else, there's probably a reason why. So yeah, and I think national museums are also not there just to be everyone's playthings. So yeah, there is other money, but it is really hard. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop having science museums. It just means we have to take seriously the other ways of finding funding. But I know you found it difficult, Robin. This, that we talked about this a lot at the time. That where does the responsibility sit, right? Is it everyone's responsibility? Is there a point where you just go, oh well, I can't change the system? And for you and me, it was that we're not comfortable with this. This doesn't feel right, and we have a choice, and we're going to choose not to. Yeah, but it's really, and I think there's going to be more of it, because the other thing that I'll say this and then I'll stop ranting, sorry, is that a lot of these companies, the biggest problem is that what the existing people at the top of the company really want is to get to the end of their careers intact and get out and leave the problem to somebody else. They don't want to change. They don't really want to change. Some of them are doing better than others. Shell is not doing well. And if they wanted to change, and if they were actually changing, that's fine. We understand it takes time to rebuild infrastructure, but it's they're not even taking the problem seriously. And that is the thing that I think means that, you just cannot afford, like, you're just helping them greenwash. And I think that's not on. So yeah, but it is really hard.
Thank you. And that wasn't a rant at all. We need voices like yours, informed voices, more and more out there, because there's far too many poorly informed voices with a lot of column space who write about these kind of things.
Can I say something else? Actually, I just remembered on a different topic, which is that book, Empire of Pain, I can say this because it's public now, but I am judging the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction this year, and our long list was published last week. Empire of Pain is on it, and the judging process is still going on, so I can't say too much about any of the books on there, but I do, if anyone needs some books to read, there are 13 books on the long list, and I highly recommend looking at those and keeping an eye on the process, because one of the joys of judging book prizes, it turns out, I've never done it before, is that people just turn up with all these amazing books, and you do get like boxes. I'm sure you get boxes of books anyway, but if you judged a book prize out, you'd lose them in your mountains of books. But and they are really good books, so people need some good reading, then keep an eye out for the shortlist and then the winner, because there are some really amazing books on there.
Yeah, there's always been, Baillie Gifford has always had I think a fantastic short and long list as well. Now you mentioned pain, so we'll move on. Seema, aged 9, would like to know about how painkillers work. How does it stop pain in your leg or your head? How does it know where it hurts?
Clever, isn't it? So the short version is that there are messengers, there are chemical and physical messengers that take a message from your toe, if you've just stubbed your toe, all the way up into your brain. And there are quite a lot of stages along the way. So first of all, and I'm not going to go into the biochemistry, mostly because I don't know all the details, but you need, for example, certain chemicals to be formed at the site of pain. You need enzymes to help move those chemicals along. You need signals to travel down nerves. And so there are all of these pathways, but they're only activated when you have pain. So there are 3 classes of painkillers, and what they do in their different ways is they stop they act as a sort of roadblock at various places along that pathway. So for the opioids, it's towards the end. For things like aspirin, it's near the beginning. But the point is that they stop any pain signals being sent. So it's not that the pain doesn't happen, it's that the messenger can't get to your brain. So basically that's what they do, that they stop the messengers, so your brain never knows that your body is in pain.
Brilliant.
Anywhere in the body.
I hope that this is an interesting one. Dale would like to know, is there any research into the sixth sense? For example, when I'm sitting at the traffic lights, how do I know the person in the car next to me is staring at me? Now, this is always an interesting, because most of this is, as far as I can see, there's not that much good kind of lab research into this, but I might be wrong about that. But that idea that we as human beings often have this kind of an instinct which we then see as being something which is perhaps in some ways beyond the laws of physics.
So there are two parts to the answer, and a neurologist might come up with more complicated ones. So I think neurologists do study this, and the first part of the answer is that our brain takes in a lot of information. It doesn't tell all of it to our consciousness, which, sounds, in fact, it tells a very small part of it to our consciousness. So, if you've ever, if you've been somewhere, there's a hum in the background, for example, when you walk into the room, you go, oh, there's a hum, it's really annoying. Half an hour later, you've completely forgotten the hum exists, because your brain is still taking in that information, but it's just decided it's not worth it. So it's not telling you about it. So the first thing is that I think some of what the questioner is referring to is the idea that things are going on around you. And so maybe you're not looking over there, but you'll think a thing because something has been bumped up from your unconscious self into your consciousness, and that makes you look to the right. So I think part of it could be that. And the other thing is that there are kind of learned behaviors, right? We're good at anticipating what might happen, and we really notice when it lines up. So, for example, my phone rang yesterday morning about 11 a.m. and I was like, oh, that's my sister, before I had looked at the phone or picked it up. But I know that if someone phones me at 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning, it's probably my sister. And so part of it is that we anticipate a lot, and then we notice it. We go, oh, well, we thought that was going to happen. And then if it's something really serious, we look back and we say, oh, well, I knew that when she called, I felt there was something. This call yesterday was fine, but she was calling about the dog. But that she, you add a story afterwards to make sense of it, and you only remember the ones where there's a good story to add. So I don't think there's any evidence at all for any what is conventionally thought of as a sixth sense, but I do think that the things that our brains are doing that we don't appreciate, and they only tell our consciousness thinks it's very clever and is making all the decisions and all the judgments, but actually there's a lot going on under the hood, and I think a lot of it falls into that. I mean, this is probably something you've spoken to a lot of neuroscientists for your latest book and for other things. What's come back from them?
Well, do you know what? I skipped over all that because that chapter became about 200 pages long, which is too long for a 400-page book, which is meant to have 12 chapters. But I think that's one of the things that fascinates me most, which is I think a lot of different ideas, which are sometimes studied by parapsychologists, etc., are really us trying to understand that the brain is so complex, as you said, so much of it we don't see and we don't hear, and are brilliant at finding a pattern, which is also a worrying thing for science, of course, as well, for all of our studies, which is, that beautiful thing of, you can't observe nature from outside of nature. And that idea that the fact that even the very best scientists working in worlds where they believe they can be as objective as possible, we are a creature that you can fight against it as much, but there's so much going on in our brain, which goes, I've found that. I remember Alan Moore talking about Steve Moore, his friend who died a few years ago, his dream diary, and he wrote very all of these and I think that is one of those things sometimes where when more people write the dream diary, the more they're able to recall their dreams, and there's lots of different activity. And his final dream was very similar to the incident that then happened for when he was found after he died. And there were certain little things, the coincidences that happened together. And that's and when you look at it, it does feel remarkable. But then you wonder how much of a human trick is being played on us all the time. So it is, and I think you're right about the under the bonnet thing, which is if we could hear everything that's going on, all of the noises of the machine, then we wouldn't move. And we would probably have to jump out of a window because it would be deafening, wouldn't it, to take in every part of a picture. And I think we do impose. It's a bit like when you briefly see someone, and maybe the shape of their face or the shape of their hair is similar to a friend of yours, and you therefore then in your mind, this is why eyewitness accounts are so terrible, is in your mind you very quickly fill in that person's face, and it's quite similar to that other person you know, and then eventually you might look at them when you get on the tube and you go, that person looks nothing like I thought they looked. My brain did a quick leap going, I'll sketch this in for you. There we go, sketched it in. So I think that bit of filling in the picture with as many shortcuts as possible is a very interesting part of it as well.
But then pattern recognition is so good. So this is going to sound a bit weird, right? I promise it's not as weird as it sounds. So I play badminton a lot, and there's a club I've been playing at for several years, and when you walk into the club, you can kind of see the bottom of the court, so you can see everyone's legs. There's a moment where you can kind of see everyone's legs, but you can't see their top halves. And a few years ago, I walked into the club and I was like, oh, and I shan't use his name, but I was like, oh, that's this friend. And I hadn't seen him. It was someone I played badminton with at university that I hadn't seen for maybe 10 or 15 years. And within a second of seeing this pair of legs on the court, my brain was like, it's him. And it was him. And it was one of those things where, like, I'd never noticed his legs before. This sounds awful, right? But I'd never noticed it. But your bodies are, on the badminton court, everyone does move differently, and your legs are an important part of how you play. So it is very distinctive. But it was so quick, and I was right. And I had no reason to think he would be there, but my brain had the pattern. It matched up the pattern correctly after 15 years. And so we are capable of when you think about that had to be held somewhere in cells.
That's the bit that I never understand. Which is because I have that obviously with movies. I will see a split second, walk into a room, split second, and I'll say, oh, is that's this film, isn't it? And my dad, whatever, go, how do you know that? And I go, I don't know, because it's not a film that I've seen for 30 years. It's not a film that I love, but somewhere in my mind is this strange little NFT catalogue of everything, which is of no use whatsoever, no pragmatic use. And I'm always where memories are kept and how that works and what is required to fire all of those, to suddenly, I suppose, to regroup that pattern that existed 30 or 40 years ago, and suddenly that pattern happens again. But we haven't got time for that. My God, this is exactly why the chapter on the brain was a disaster in terms of editing. So let's... Petroni would like to know, I know this is probably really basic. You never have to say that because none of these questions are ever basic. The moment that these start, they always go off into so many worlds. So do not worry about that. I don't understand how it's possible to have an electric field in a vacuum.
I will try to be brief with this one because you can go into all sorts of subtleties here. But basically, every place in space or in space-time, if you want to think about it like that, has some properties. And an electric field is one of those things. So at every point in space-time, there's a little arrow. It's not a real little arrow, but a little arrow that's got a length which tells you how strong it is and a direction that it's pointing in. And that's what a field is. A field in general is that every point in space has this. It's got the potential to have this thing. And in a lot of space, it's just zero for an electric field. But if it has to, it can change. And so the time it might change is if you put an electric charge nearby, and then we know an electric charge has a field around it, but actually the field was there all the time. It's just that it was zero. And that charge has made all those points. It's suddenly given those little arrows a place to point and a direction to point in. So the answer really is that the electric field is there all the time. It's just zero quite a lot of the time. But when it gets a kick and when something next to it changes, like when the charge or another bit of an electric field moves, it has to move in response. And it's the response that we see as an electric field. But it is there all the time. And it can exist in a vacuum because it's just a property of space-time. I think it's just a thing that you can have in space-time. There is a field everywhere in the universe. So you don't need atoms in order to have electric fields. And a vacuum is just a place with no atoms.
Brilliant. Thank you. I hope that has helped. Ollie would like to know, mobile phones can't really interfere with flight equipment, can they? Why do we have to have airplane mode? Now, this is an interesting one because, of course, we had a similar thing with petrol stations as well, where there was always turn off your mobile phone because otherwise it might create a spark. And Mythbusters did a big thing, I think, on that. All of these different ideas.
For very, very early mobile phones, there might have been a danger of a spark, but I think in more recent years, probably not. So the thing about aircraft, all electromagnetic signals like that, is that there is this thing called tuning, which is very useful because it means you can have lots of different sizes of wave going past you, but you can only detect the ones that are exactly the right size. And if you look at mobile phones now, if you look at the frequencies they work at, I can't remember exactly what the frequency is, but the distinction between one mobile phone tower and another is like 6 decimal places or something, maybe 5. It's really detailed, and your mobile phone is exactly like 38.35984, and that is the frequency. And if you go one step away from that, it doesn't detect it anymore. So the original reason, I think, was that it was thought that having cell towers and all these electric signals would sort of push into the frequencies that the planes were using, not just to navigate, but just the systems on the plane. And I think there was a cautiousness about that. And now we know that that is not the case, that the frequencies are so far apart that they're probably not going to interfere with one another. I don't know why you're still asked to turn them off when, because sometimes you land and you can turn phones on straight away. So I don't think there's any reason to turn them off when you're flying, apart from it's just a cautious thing, right? There's so many things that people are so cautious about planes. You don't want your plane to be the one day when the thing did interfere with this other thing and then there was a problem. So I think it's a good precautionary principle, but I don't think there's a specific thing it's going to interfere with. But you don't want someone's phone to go wrong and start broadcasting at the wrong frequency and then for that to cause a problem. So I think it's a precaution.
And the other thing with mobile phones on planes is ensure that the last tweet that you put out before you turn off your phone is as innocuous as possible. Because I think everyone has had, if anyone has read, for instance, John Ronson's book, You've Been Publicly Shamed, that bit where you go, oh my God, this has been misunderstood for 10 hours while I've been in the air. Final questions about poo. Not well poo this time. This is from Michelle. This is there's a lot of dog poo about. Can we use it for anything? The grossness of collecting it all aside. Now this is an interesting thing as well, because I wonder, the carnivore poo appears to be less useful, for instance, in cultivation and stuff like that.
We did touch on this because somebody asked whether they could put dog poo on their gardens, I think, probably 6 months ago, somewhere in those. I'm still struggling with the idea. We've done 70 of these shows. It's just become part of my life. But anyway, so I think that the thing, I had an answer at the time to this, and I can't quite remember what it is. I don't think there's very much you can do with dog poo when it comes to carnivore poo. Doesn't appear to be very good fertilizer. And I did know the reason for that, and I can't remember what it is. But it's got a lot less cellulose in it, and it's got a lot less fibrous stuff, and presumably it's got a lot less, although it would presumably protein is quite high in nitrogen and phosphorus. Maybe the dog's I don't know a lot about what's left. I don't know which bits of an animal a dog doesn't digest. That's a probably more accurate statement. I should find that out. But as I said, my sister's dog seems to eat carrots, so presumably its poo could go in a garden. Don't know. So is there anything else we could do with it? Well, people do use poo for, you can burn it, for example, because otherwise it would decompose, the carbon would go into the atmosphere anyway. So there are places where people have burned, in the past, people burned manure as a source of fuel. Probably out of fashion today because of the air pollution caused, I would say, for that.
I think also the smell of, I think it's Sex Panther in the film Anchorman, the aftershave.
That burning dog poo, is it?
Yeah, I think it's described. I won't even say how it's described because I know children are watching, but it involves Bigfoot's feces and burnt hair.
Well, I think the answer, which is probably an appropriate one to finish on, is I don't really know. So we can all go away and do our research.
Yeah, I'd avoid that research. Let's just move on. Yeah, that's where we'll skip that one. Thank you very much, Helen, for all of. And we still got a few left over, so we'll try and put those in to the shows that are coming up. As I said, we're going to not do a weekly now 10 a.m. Live show, but we will be aiming to put out new science stuff at 10 a.m. every Sunday. Some of them will be pre-recorded interviews with scientists and authors. Some of them also, as I said, if you've got things that you'd like us to look into, or we can make some specials as well and stuff like that, send them to cosmicshambles.com or send them to our Twitter or wherever. and we'll make a series of short films, and we will still have, I think, at least once a month we will be doing the live science Q&A as well. So thank you very much everyone for joining. As I said, if you are able to support us by Patreon and you don't already, patreon.com/Cosmic Shambles, where we make tips for existence and all of the other shows, including all of this stuff, and then a new series of Uncanny Hour coming up, and further episodes of the series of Book You Might Not Know. The latest
Can I
episode
interrupt
of that.
before you finish?
Yeah, sure
when you're almost at the end of your plugs.
Yeah,
I've got
go
something
on.
else, which is that, and maybe you were going to say this, but I just want to make really sure, is that you and I and lots of guests have been here at 3 p.m. and then at 10 a.m. for 18 months, and a lot of people have been with us, and they're listening to us. Some of them will be listening to us now, some of them will be listening to us later, but whoever you are, we helped you deal with the weird world that we faced, and you helped us because we also had something to do. And it's a big teamwork thing. So we're very grateful to the rest of the team. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been listening and who will continue to listen to all the things that Robin has been talking about. But it seems like a good time to really say thank you to our audience, because we really appreciate you being here as well.
And we have had very regular with the questions as well. Incredible variety of questions come in from an incredible variety of ages as well, which is brilliant. That's one of the things that I've always wondered about that, though. I've wondered if someone sometimes goes, I didn't get my question asked for the last 3 weeks. What if I just pretend to be aged 8, which is always a good trick if you are ever at a science Q&A event. If you're not aged 8, pretend you're aged 8. So I might see some of you might be at the Canterbury. I'm doing the final warm-up show with Brian Cox tonight in Canterbury. Helen, what are you up to?
I am making a radio program about the Sir David Attenborough, which is the UK's new polar research vessel, the ultimate boatface. The Ocean Matters podcast is still out. We've just done one on manta rays, which was very exciting, and I'm still writing my book, which isn't finished yet.
Right. Well, I will. And I'll be off doing this 111 date tour, where I know an extra date's just been added for Mount Florida Books in Glasgow. The first show sold out very quickly, but I'll also be in Manchester at the Anthony Burgess Foundation on the 8th of October, and on the 10th of October I will be in Carlisle at the Borderlines Festival. But they're all up at Cosmic Shambles as well, all the different places I'm going. Thank you very much to producer Trent Burton, who produces all of the stuff that we make at Shambles and puts a huge amount of effort in. And have a lovely weekend and have a lovely week. We hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.